It all began with a letter. A harmless envelope tucked under the doormat, sealed with a logo embossed in gold that read, Willow Creek HOA. A suburb nestled among tall pine trees and man-made lakes. Willow Creek was the kind of place people dreamed of retiring in, quiet, pristine, predictable. And I wanted nothing to do with it. I bought the land, built my house with my own hands, and made sure to remain independent of any homeowners association before finalizing my deed. I had seen the tyranny of HOAs before. Power-hungry volunteers turned tyrants with nothing better to do than enforce rules about mailbox colors and lawn height. That wasn't going to be my life, but the letter had a tone that made it clear they had other ideas. "Dear resident," it began, "we are delighted to welcome you to our Willow Creek family. Per community regulation, all property owners are automatically enrolled in the Homeowners Association and are expected to comply with our governing policies." I nearly choked on my coffee. I was not enrolled, I was not compliant, and I certainly wasn't part of their family. I crumpled the letter and tossed it into the fireplace, watching it shrivel into nothing. That's where it belonged. The A. Next week, a woman in a golf cart drove up my gravel driveway wearing a polo with the HOA logo stitched on her chest. Behind her, a clipboard, and behind the clipboard, arrogance. "Ms. Hawthorne?" I stared her down. "Judge Hawthorne." "And you are?" "Bradley Jenkins, president of the Willow Creek HOA. I'm here to inform you that your fencing is in violation of our community guidelines. It's not whitewashed." I leaned against the porch railing, letting the silence do most of the talking. "I'm not in. Your HOA, Bradley." She laughed like I was a child who didn't understand the rules. "It's not optional, Judge. Willow Creek has mandatory membership clauses for all properties in the development. My property was purchased with legal exemption. Check the county deed. And if you try to enforce anything on me again, you'll find yourself on the wrong side of a courtroom." Bradley's jaw twitched. "We'll see about that." She turned on her heel and drove off, tires spitting up gravel. I didn't see her again for a month. But I saw signs. HOA notices duct taped to my gate. Warnings about fines for uncut grass, non-standard roofing. A chicken coop they claimed was unauthorized. I ignored them all. They had no power over me, and deep down they knew it. But bullies don't need law. They rely on fear. And when fear didn't work, they escalated. One night in mid-June, I returned from a federal circuit court hearing, exhausted and sore from the 4-hour drive. As I turned the bend toward my home, I noticed the eerie glow before I even reached the driveway. Then came the smoke. Thick, black, rising into the sky like a funeral pyre. My house was on fire. I ran up the path, calling 911, but it was already too late. The cabin I had built with my own hands, the home I had retired into with plans of peace, was reduced to a skeleton of blackened beams and smoldering ash. Firefighters arrived within minutes, but by then, it was already gone. They worked through the night, dousing what little remained, documenting their process, asking the usual questions. When they brought the arson investigator out the next morning, the cause was clear. Gasoline accelerant. Intentionally spread. No accidental origin. It was no longer a nuisance. It was a war. I filed the official report. I provided security footage, most of which had been mysteriously wiped, but a backup camera in a tree caught grainy footage of 2 masked figures approaching. The rear deck just after 1 a.m. They carried gas cans. They also carried a logo. On their jackets, barely visible, was the Willow Creek HOA badge. I didn't wait for justice. I was justice. While the investigation slogged through red tape, I started building a case of my own. I was a retired federal judge, but I still had contacts in the Department of Justice, real estate law, and civil litigation. I compiled every interaction, every notice, every veiled threat from Bradley and her minions. I pulled county records and found something interesting. Willow Creek HOA had filed their articles of incorporation improperly. They were operating under an expired charter. That meant they were technically defunct. Every enforcement, every fine, every fee, every mandatory clause they had issued in the last 3 years had no legal foundation. And the cherry on top? They had spent HOA funds, dues collected from actual members, on off-the-books projects, including a community security initiative, which, upon digging, turned out to be the same team that patrolled the neighborhood and drove up to my home the night of the fire. Illegal use of funds, criminal misrepresentation, coordinated property destruction. I brought the case to a federal prosecutor. He took one look and launched an inquiry. Within 2 weeks, subpoenas were flying. Bradley Jenkins and 4 board members were served. Their financial records seized. Their personal correspondence investigated. What started as an HOA squabble had now become a multi-agency probe. But I wasn't done. With my home gone, I stayed, in a small cabin on a friend's property nearby. But every day I drove past the charred remains, and every day I felt the slow, righteous burn inside me grow stronger. They thought they could scare me. They thought they could erase me. Instead, they awakened the full force of the law. I filed a civil suit, $4.7 million in damages, destruction of private property, emotional distress, defamation, harassment, and criminal trespass. My case was airtight. I had evidence, motive, and testimony, and I filed it in federal court where I knew the judges. When the day of the first hearing arrived, Bradley strutted into court like it was a PTA meeting. When she left, her attorney had already whispered the truth. We're going to lose. The community turned against her quickly. As word spread about the HOA's expired status and misuse of funds, neighbors realized they'd been paying dues to an entity that didn't exist. They were furious. Petitions circulated. Board resignations followed. Local news picked up the story. My name went from whispered in contempt to spoken with admiration. In their arrogance, they forgot one thing. You don't start a fire you can't put out, and you don't provoke a judge unless you're ready to stand trial. The ruins of the house still smoldered the next morning. The scorched earth smelled of vengeance, of charred wood, and something deeper, betrayal. The smell lingered in Judge Helena Marston's nostrils as she stood before what used to be her lakefront haven. Her eyes weren't misty with loss anymore. They were burning with cold determination. Helena wasn't just any homeowner. She was a seasoned federal judge, with decades of courtroom experience and a legal mind sharper than a surgeon's scalpel. But the HOA had underestimated her. They thought they were intimidating a recluse, not awakening a legal force of nature. Now, Helena wasn't just rebuilding her home, she was preparing a legal warpath. She began by documenting everything. Photos of the fire's aftermath, the burned remnants of her title deed, the blistered wood of the HOA's trespass notice that had somehow survived the inferno. Then she walked the perimeter of her land, recording every sign of unauthorized entry. As she collected evidence, she called her longtime clerk, Ingrid, instructing her to initiate formal legal action against the HOA board members, particularly their president, Clarice Bellamy, the iron-haired woman who led the HOA like a private kingdom. Clarice had always strutted through the neighborhood like she was royalty. With her sharp suits, faux charm, and a clipboard she wielded like a sword, she issued citations for mailboxes a half-inch too high or flower pots that didn't match the approved aesthetic. Clarice had written Helena dozens of letters demanding she join the HOA, pay dues, and conform to the local code. Helena ignored them all, as her property had never been part of the HOA covenant. It predated the entire development. But Clarice didn't take no for an answer. And now, Helena knew she'd taken revenge by torching what couldn't be controlled. By noon that same day, Helena's legal team was in motion. A temporary office was established in a nearby town, and subpoenas began to fly. Public records, HOA meeting minutes, insurance statements, and surveillance footage from neighboring properties were all requested. Her first legal maneuver, a cease and desist order against any further HOA contact. Clarice, however, responded with arrogant confidence. In a press release issued to the community, she claimed Helena's house fire was an unfortunate electrical incident, and that the judge's accusations were misinformed and inflammatory. Helena didn't bite. She filed a civil suit accusing the HOA of trespassing, arson, and harassment. But more than that, she used a legal tool few expected. She filed a motion for judicial review of the HOA's entire formation process. With this, she would scrutinize every line of the original HOA charter, searching for inconsistencies, illegal land grabs, and improperly notarized documents, and she found them. In 1997, the HOA had expanded its authority by absorbing land that legally remained outside its control, including Helena's lakeside acreage. That expansion, Helena discovered, was never recorded with the county clerk. It was a clerical oversight the HOA had taken advantage of for years. It was also completely invalid. That became the cornerstone of her attack. A month later, the first hearing took place. The courtroom was packed. Media, curious neighbors, and a flustered Clarice flanked by expensive lawyers. Helena, calm and controlled, laid out the evidence with surgical precision. Her opening statement recounted the fire not as a tragic loss, but as the last straw in a campaign of coercion and illegal governance. Clarice's defense sputtered. They denied any wrongdoing, but they couldn't deny the missing filings, the faulty jurisdiction, or the HOA emails Helena's team had subpoenaed. Emails where Clarice discussed Helena as a problem to be neutralized. 3 hours into the hearing, Helena called the county records officer to the stand. Under oath, the officer admitted the HOA's 1997 expansion was never formally approved. The judge overseeing the case, a no-nonsense man named Justice Eldridge, raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me this entire association has been acting without proper jurisdiction over multiple properties?" "Yes, Your Honor," Helena answered, "including my own." Gasps filled the courtroom. Clarice shifted in her seat. For the first time, her smug confidence cracked. The next blow came via insurance reports. An independent fire investigator testified that the blaze had multiple points of origin, classic signs of arson. The report also noted accelerant residue inconsistent with anything stored on Helena's property. Clarice's husband owned a landscaping company, and 2 of his employees were seen on Helena's road hours before the fire. One of them had a prior arson conviction. That detail turned the case from civil to criminal. Within a week, a separate investigation opened. Clarice was indicted on charges of conspiracy to commit arson, abuse of power, and falsifying HOA records. The board she once ruled was thrown into chaos. Some members resigned. Others offered to testify in exchange for immunity. But Helena wasn't done. She pushed for the dissolution of the HOA itself. With the original expansion voided and the president under indictment, she argued the association no longer held legal standing. A vote was ordered among the remaining legal members, and Helena bought ad space, sent mailers, and held town halls to educate homeowners about their rights. The vote was swift. 72% voted to dissolve the HOA. Clarice watched the result from her holding cell. The woman who once barked citations over mailbox paint was now confined by 4 gray walls. Her empire had crumbled under the weight of her arrogance and Helena's relentless pursuit of justice. With the HOA gone, Helena used a court-approved lien to seize Clarice's assets to fund her rebuilding. The ashes of her cabin were cleared, and in its place rose a new structure, larger, stronger, and with a high-tech security system powered by solar energy and monitored by federal-grade surveillance. A sign at the gate read, "Private property. Federal protection enforced." Local news hailed Helena as a hero, and neighbors who once feared the HOA brought her food, flowers, and handwritten notes. They weren't just grateful for the end of Clarice's tyranny, they were inspired by Helena's resilience. She never bragged, never gloated. When asked by a reporter what motivated her to fight, Helena simply said, "The law exists to protect people from tyranny, whether it comes from criminals or committees." As summer faded into fall, Helena sat on her rebuilt porch, watching the lake shimmer in the golden dusk. The battle had been hard, but justice had prevailed. Her house stood again, not just as a home, but as a monument to perseverance, courage, and the power of standing up when wronged. And when the wind blew through the pines, it no longer carried the scent of smoke, but of peace.